What's the purpose of Christian apologetics? Christian apologetics is basically the intellectual defense of the truth of the Christian religion. It's not an apology in the sense that we use that term today. It's not Christians apologizing for all the terrible things they've done throughout world history. No, it's an intellectual defense of the theology, doctrines, teachings, claims, etc. of Christianity. It's important to note that this is an intellectual exercise. It's about reason. To quote from the website of the Grace Theological Seminary, where they talk about this topic, put simply, it is the rational response against the objections people bring up about Christianity. To be clear, Grace Theological Seminary is a conservative evangelical Christian seminary that was founded in 1937 and currently located in Indiana. So this is a conservative Christian view of what apologetics is. Note again that this is an intellectual exercise. It's a rational exercise. It's the endeavour to provide a sound intellectual defence of Christianity, to place Christianity on a sound, rational basis. The people who undertake Christian apologetics support the enterprise on the basis of some biblical texts. For example, in 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. I would identify three principal aims of apologetics. First of all, to demonstrate that Christian beliefs are intellectually and philosophically reasonable. Who are apologists trying to prove this to? Presumably non-believers, but also, and maybe in practice this is even more the case, to themselves and other Christians. I honestly doubt whether Christian apologetics has ever had much success in convincing non-believers about the truth of Christian doctrine, specifically about its reasonableness or rationality. But it probably has provided comfort and reassurance to believers who want to be able to tell themselves that their beliefs are not completely wacko. The second aim is to address common objections, criticisms, and misunderstandings about Christianity. Answering objections and criticisms can be seen as an attempt to counter the arguments put by non-believers. So this is a kind of argumentation and debate. But correcting misunderstandings can be viewed as a more educational process. The first is saying, no, you're wrong because of this, this, and this. The second is saying, no, that's not what Christianity actually teaches. This is what it actually teaches. Presumably the first aims to persuade an opponent. The second aims to provide what it regards as accurate information, perhaps to counter misinformation. The third purpose is to provide rational arguments that will help to persuade someone who's maybe on the fence, to capture the swing vote, so to speak. This then is a kind of evangelism, providing rational arguments that will help move someone towards the Christian faith, or at least remove obstacles on their way to Christian faith. Now, as I already pointed out, apologists find their justification for this in the New Testament. I mentioned 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. More fully, that says, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." There are two things to note here. First, the admonition is to give an answer to everyone who asks. This fits in with the third purpose mentioned above, namely to help people who are seeking or are on the fence, people who are genuinely inquiring, but to do it with gentleness and respect. Maybe advice that's not always followed. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, Paul says, "We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ." This doesn't sound quite so gentle. This seems to fit more with the second aim of apologetics, to defend the faith against objections and criticisms, to defend it against attack. In Acts chapter 17, verse 17, the author describes Paul undertaking apologetics. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. This sounds very much like a description of how Socrates might have taught in the streets of Athens, or how Plato may have engaged in philosophical discussion and debate in the academy. Now, this very much presents Christian teaching as if it were a system of philosophy, a rational understanding of the world, something that people can be brought to accept by a process of reasoning, something that can be presented so that it's intellectually convincing, a system of thought that is intellectually respectable. But perhaps the aim is actually somewhat more modest than this. Maybe the aim is not to prove that these things actually are true, but rather that they could be true. These ideas, these occurrences, are not incompatible with reason or with evidence. They're not excluded by reason or experience. However, if I'm being asked to change my life or commit my life to something or someone, I need more than just the possibility that these claims might be true. This sounds rather like Pascal's wager. Blaise Pascal was a French mathematician, philosopher, and theologian. Everybody seemed to do everything in those days. Maybe he was a plumber too. Pascal argued that a rational person should adopt a lifestyle consistent with the existence of God and actively strive to believe in God. The reasoning for this lies in the potential outcomes. If God doesn't exist, the individual incurs only finite losses, potentially sacrificing certain pleasures, certain luxuries. I would dispute whether these things are necessarily small or insignificant, but that's an argument for another day. On the other hand, Pascal argues, if God does indeed exist, people stand to gain immeasurably, as represented, for example, by an eternity in heaven in the Abrahamic tradition, while simultaneously avoiding boundless losses, pain, suffering associated with an eternity in hell. So people will sometimes say things like this. I think I've heard the apologist William Lane Craig say this kind of thing. Even if there is only one chance in a million that the Christian gospel is true, shouldn't you accept it rather than take the risk of burning in hell forever? Well, I happen to think it's possible to say no to this for many reasons, which I've touched on elsewhere, but I won't go into that today. Look, it's possible to show that all kinds of things are not incompatible with reason or with evidence. There are the usual suspects, things like unicorns and fairies. There's no argument from reason to prove that unicorns can't exist, nor can I argue from experience that unicorns don't exist, because obviously my experience and all of our combined experience is still limited. Just because I've never seen a unicorn or found evidence in the fossil record for unicorns or found a scat of unicorns in the Black Forest, none of this can prove that they never existed anywhere at any time, and perhaps that they still exist somewhere today. Maybe they exist on another planet or in some kind of reality parallel to our own, where fairy children ride unicorns to school every day. So when it comes to the question of the existence of unicorns, I'm not concerned with whether or not unicorns can, in theory, exist, but whether they actually do exist. For that, I require evidence. This is why the burden of proof always lies with someone making the claim rather than with someone questioning it. Getting me to admit that the existence of unicorns is not entirely impossible is not some great victory for the unicorn apologist. I still don't believe that they actually exist. Obviously, the same is true for God. Demonstrating that the existence of God is a logical possibility, or at least that it's not a logical impossibility, is not a great victory for the apologist. This proves nothing about whether God actually exists. For that, I would need concrete evidence. But the problem for the Christian apologist is not that simple. All the apologists will have done is opened up the possibility that the Christian God may exist. But so too may the God of Islam, or the Hindu gods, or even the Greek and Roman gods for that matter. All of these may exist, but there's no proof that any of them actually do. And if I'm going to accept Pascal's wager, which of these options will I put my money on? That would seem to matter. I could put my money on the Christian God, only to have it turn out that it's actually the God of Islam that exists, and that could have some unfortunate consequences. The Christian apologist has to prove much more than just the fact that the existence of God is not incompatible with reason. They have to be able to demonstrate that the entire Christian enterprise is not incompatible with reason or experience. It all at least could be true. Even if that could be demonstrated, it would still not be possible to conclude from this that it actually is true. This is where, presumably, grace and faith step in. To make this last step possible, to move from conceding that it all may be true to actually believing that it is true. Is Christian apologetics actually trying to prove this? Not just that it could be true, but that it actually is true? I don't think so. I don't think that this would actually be compatible with the gospel itself, which emphasizes faith and God's grace. I would argue that many aspects of the Christian belief system are in fact not intellectually defensible. They are incompatible with reason and internally inconsistent, but actually demonstrably wrong from the empirical point of view. I have other videos that address some of these issues specifically. I think Christian apologetics can be quite embarrassing because it's so obviously an attempt to justify beliefs after the fact, after they've been arrived at in an entirely non-rational way. When apologetics fails, the fallback position is that belief in God is not a question of reason, but of faith. God is invoked. The Holy Spirit will move in you to reveal the truth. Attempts to provide some kind of rational basis for this come later, and they usually involve some convoluted, contorted arguments which are not at all convincing to anyone who doesn't already believe. It's the same with flat earthers. For unfathomable reasons, they arrive at the belief that the earth is flat, and then they come up with arguments and observations to support this. But let's be clear, the starting point is the belief. The rationalization comes later. It serves mainly to suppress the uncomfortable feeling that they may, after all, be making a terrible mistake. But they're committed now. I believe that, even now, little fairy children are riding their unicorns to school in fairy world. I choose to believe this because it's cute and adorable and gives me a warm glow inside. Prove I'm wrong.